All right, so if we're starting with number 1, I've got 1 over 9 plus 1 over 2x equals 1 over x squared. The very first thing our steps told us on Friday was to factor any and all denominators that can factor. So take a look at your denominators. I've got a 9, I've got a 2x, and I've got an x squared. Can any of those factor? No. Okay. Second step was if we could or if we needed them to state our restrictions. So if I am looking at my denominators, sorry, trying to get this to move a little bit. The first denominator doesn't have a variable in it, so that one's not going to give me a restriction. The second denominator is 2 times x. 2 times what gives me 0? 0, okay, so x cannot be 0. And then if I'm looking at my third fraction denominator, it's x squared. What number squared is equal to 0? 0, which I already have, right? So even though the denominators are kind of different, 2 times x and then x squared, the restriction for both of those is the same. So that's my only restriction is x cannot equal 0. Then I need to come up with my least common denominator. We have a 9, we have a 2x, and we have an x squared. So think about the number part first, 9 and 2. What's the least common denominator for that? 18, okay. And then if I think about the variable parts, I have an x and an x squared. What would we use? X squared. Okay, so my least common denominator together is 18x squared. Keep in mind, if you pick a least common denominator and you multiply your equation by it and you don't get rid of your fractions, you didn't pick enough, okay? You can always have more than you need, but you have to have at least enough to get rid of all of your fractions when you multiply. So what we're going to do now is we're going to multiply each piece by 18x squared. Starting with that first one, how many times does 9 go into 18? 2. So that 9 is going to disappear, that 18 is going to turn to a 2. And so I'll have 1 times 2x squared, which is just going to give me 2x squared. I'm going to bring down my plus sign. Second fraction, my denominator is 2x. If I divide 18x squared by 2x, what's left? 9x. So that 2x disappears. That's all going to turn into just 9x. And I multiply that 9x times the numerator of 1, which is just 9x. Is everybody okay with that? Bring down my equal sign. And when I multiply my last fraction, my denominator is x squared. So if I divide 18x squared by x squared, I'm just left with, whoa. Try that again. Come on. Not responding. Try it again. The x squareds just cancel out, and I'm left with 1 times 18, which is just 18, correct? So when I multiply by my LCD, I got rid of all my fractions, which was my goal. Anybody have any questions on that part? So I have a 2x squared plus a 9x equals 18. What am I going to have to do to solve here? I'm going to have to factor, which means I need to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to take and subtract my 18 over first. Now this one is a little trickier to factor just because we've got a number in front of our x squared. It's not impossible. It's not extremely difficult. Okay, first of all, do 2, 9, and 18 all have something in common? No. Okay. So let's think about this. First of all, what we're trying to do, we are trying to subtract to get 9, and I need to keep that in my head as I think about my factors of 2 and my factors of 18. My middle term is odd, which says I can't use a pair of even factors, but I don't have a pair of even factors, so that doesn't really change anything. I do know that my only option, did it go away? Oh, it's not writing, is it? Let's see if it catches up. Hmm? That's good. There we go. Now, so the factors, the only factors of 2 are 1 and 2, so that's the only option. I just need to decide. I'm trying to subtract to get 9. I probably don't want to use 1 and 18, right? We talked about that's the last option. If I'm trying to subtract to get 9, and I start out with a 2, I probably don't want to try 2 and 9 either. So I'm going to start with 3 and 6. If 3 and 6 doesn't work, then I'll go back to the 2 and the 9. But I'm going to try the 3 and the 6 first. And if I try that 3 and that 6, which number is not allowed to go in the parenthesis with the 2? The 6. So if it works with 3 and 6, this is going to be the only way that it does work. With the 3 in the parentheses with the 2, and then the x6 with the x. So let's take a look. If I multiply, what's 2 times 6? 12, and 3 times 1 is 3. Does 12 and 3 subtract to give me 9? Yeah, okay, so I got it right the first time. So I need different signs because my second sign is a plus, and the bigger one is going to go with a plus sign. So now I have 2x minus 3 times x plus 6. And when I am solving by factoring, once I get it factored, I take and set each one of those factors equal to 0. So I'm going to start with this one. I'll take 2x minus 3 and set it equal to 0. Take x plus 6 and set it equal to 0. I can solve both of those equations for x. So for the first one, I get 3 halves. And then for the second one, I get negative 6. What was the restriction I said I couldn't have? 0. Okay, I didn't get 0. I got 3 halves, and I got negative 6. So both of those are valid answers. Are we kind of okay? Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. If you have not already, go ahead and write 2 down. This one's going to be a little trickier. One with figuring out our restrictions. It's not that it's hard, it's just a lot of us can't look at it and tell what the restrictions are like we have been. And the second one is just the multiplying and stuff that we have to do throughout this problem. So remember, the first thing you want to try to do is factor your denominators. My denominators are 2x plus 3 and 2x minus 3. Can either of those factor? No. All right. Then we need to state our restrictions. Both of my denominators have variables in them, but a lot of us cannot look and tell what. Try that again. Okay, my 2 denominators are 2x plus 3 and 2x minus 3. If I want to know the value of x that makes that turn to 0, then all I have to do is set it equal to 0 and solve for x. That tells me what number makes the equation turn to 0. So for the first one, what can x not equal? Negative 3 halves. Again, I just set the 2x plus 3 equal to 0. And I solved it. That tells me what makes the equation equal 0. So that's what I cannot have. And I need to do the same thing for the second denominator. Set it equal to 0. And solve it for x. And that gives me a different value. This gives me a positive 3 halves. So that is what x cannot be for the second fraction. So if you're looking at your denominators and you cannot just look at it and tell what makes it turn to 0, just take it over to the side, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. That's the value that makes it turn to 0, so that's going to be what your restriction is. So far, so good. All right. Now I need my least common denominator. I have 2x plus 3 and I have 2x minus 3. Are they the same or different? They're different. And if I have two different denominators, how do we get our common denominator? We just multiply them. So we're going to go 2x plus 3 times 2x minus 3. So first step was to factor the denominators, which we could not do. Second step was state my restrictions, which we got -3/2 and +3/2. Third step is to get your LCD, which we got 2x plus 3 and 2x minus 3. The next step is to multiply everything in your equation by your LCD. I like to write it next to it so that I can actually see what cancels when I do it. With that first fraction, which piece is going to cancel with my denominator? 2x plus 3. So I have my numerator, the 2x, that I need to multiply by what's left. So for now, I'm just going to kind of put it in parentheses so that I don't make mistakes. The numerator 2x has to be multiplied by the leftover piece that did not cancel. Bring down my minus sign. What cancels in the second piece? 2x minus 3. So it has my numerator 3x that has to get multiplied by the 2x plus 3. And on the right side, there is no fraction, so there is nothing to cancel, so I'm just going to bring it down. And I know some of you probably would do some of this multiplying as you're writing it down. I'm just trying to show everything that I'm doing, so I'm kind of going and writing every step. So at this moment, does that equation look like it's ready to solve? No, it's got a lot of what that needs to happen. Distributing, FOILing, multiplying. So let's go through and let's start with the left side. Okay, I want to hold tight on the right side for just a second because I need to talk to you about that before we do it. But let's go ahead and distribute on the left side. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times -3 is -6x. -3x times 2x is a -6x squared. And -3x times 3 is a -9x. Now, what I wanted to hold tight on the right side of this is, in this case, it's a 1 times that, so that really has no effect. But let's say this were a 2 or a 3 or some other number besides 1. What you need to do is you need to FOIL first, multiply those two, and then whatever number is in front of it, distribute it after that. Now, in this case, it's a 1, so it really is not going to change anything. But if that had been a 2 or a 3, FOIL first, then distribute. That will keep you from making mistakes in your multiplying process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that 1 for now, even though it really has no effect on it. I'm going to FOIL these. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. That's a -6x. That's a +6x. And that is a -9. Again, I am just going through and showing every single step. I normally would not write all of this, and I don't expect you to write all of this. But before I do anything else, I want to distribute my 1, which again, we all know has no change on anything. However, we will get to some questions that will have another number besides 1. So we're going to just take and distribute that 1 to every piece in that parenthesis. Now I need you to work on getting your common terms together. So like terms on the left side, get them together. Like terms on the right side, get them together. And let's take a look at what we have left. Yes, this is a trickier problem. It's got a lot of work. There's a lot of multiplying, combining terms, and then turning around and factoring again. Combining my like terms on the left side, that gives me a -2x squared. That's going to give me a -15x. Over here, those x's cancel out. So combining my terms, I've got a negative 2x squared minus 15x equals 4x squared minus 9. What am I going to have to do to solve? I'm going to have to factor, which means I have to get it equal to 0. I'm going to move my x squared, my negative 2x squared, I'm moving it over to the 4x squared. And in the same process, I'm going to go ahead and add my 15x over as well. All of that cancels, leaving me with 0. 4x squared plus 2x squared is 6x squared. Then I have a plus 15x and a minus 9. What's the first step in factoring? GCF, yes. What do 6, 15, and 9 all have in common? A 3. And if I factor that 3 out, it's going to make my job a little easier to factor. My trinomial now has smaller numbers, which is easier to factor. So I want you to hold on to that 3 and take a minute and figure out how to factor 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. We're looking for factors of 2 and 3 that subtract to give me 5. There's only one set of options for 2. There's only one set of options for 3. You just got to figure out where to put the 1 and the 3 to make it work. Does the 3 go with the 2 or in the other parenthesis? In the other one. The 1 goes with the 2. Okay. Because if you look at it, 2 times 3 gives me 6. 1 times 1 is 1. 6 and 1 subtracts to give me 5. As far as the signs go, that means different signs. This one goes in front of the bigger number, so it's going to be a plus 3 and a minus 1. So far, so good? Here's where some people get a little confused. If I'm looking at my numbers, I have 1, 2, 3 factors, 3 things that I am multiplying. So when we solve by factoring, you're going to take each one of those factors and set it equal to 0, and you're going to solve for x. So if you'll notice, I took that first factor, that 3, I set it equal to 0. I took the second one, 2x plus 1, and I set it, 2x minus 1, and I set it equal to 0. And then I took the x plus 3 to set it equal to 0. Now I need to solve for x. But in that first equation, this one right here, is there anything for me to solve for? There is no x in that one. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. That just means that that part is not going to give you an answer because there's no variable to solve for. It's just going to kind of be tossed away. Bless you. We are going to solve the other 2 equations for x. And I end up getting a positive 1/2 and a negative 3. My restrictions that I said in the beginning, I couldn't get a negative 3/2 and a positive 3/2. I didn't get either one of those, so guess what my answers are? Anybody have any questions? That's one of the more tricky problems. Okay, am I going to load those down with you on your test? Absolutely not. Try to make this test as easy as I can. I'm even going to go back and rewrite it, change some of my questions to some of the simpler questions so that we don't hopefully struggle on this test. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm trying to teach a little bit and not make it extremely difficult for you. So, everybody good? All right. I would like for you to start with number 3. Start with your first step, which is to go through and factor all of your denominators if you can. Factor whatever you can. Once you get your denominators factored, then go through and figure out what your restrictions are. What is it that x cannot equal? What makes your denominators turn to 0? Once you state your restrictions, then I want you to go through and figure out what your LCD is. I rewrote my questions and I factored the only denominator that I can factor. For my restrictions, what makes that first fraction's denominator turn to 0? 0. What about the second fraction? 4. And that third fraction, when I factored it, I pulled out the GCF x, and I'm left with x times x minus 4, which are the same two pieces that I have in the other two fractions, correct? So do I need any more restrictions? No. What about your LCD? What's your common denominator going to be? X times x minus 4. My two different denominators, my x and my x minus 4. Multiply them together. That's also the two that are being multiplied in that third fraction. So that covers everything. Now, if you haven't already, go through and multiply your entire equation by that LCD so that you can see what cancels and what you have left to multiply. In the first fraction, my x's cancel. That leaves me with my entire numerator, x plus 4, that I have to multiply by the remaining piece, which is x minus 4. Bring down my plus sign. Second one, x minus 4's cancel. That leaves me with 3 times x, which is just 3x. And over here, everything cancels, so that just leaves me with negative 16. So where's it? Is the equation ready to solve yet? No, what do you need to do first? Distribute. Yeah, get ready to fractions. Go ahead and multiply those two binomials together. Multiply your x plus 4 times your x minus 4. Then you can combine your like terms. Then we can take a look at how to factor it if we need to, or how to solve it. So we're going to distribute. That gives me x squared minus 4x plus 4x minus 16. Bring down that plus 3x. So to combine my like terms here, I've got the x squared, which does not combine with anything. I got a negative 4x and a positive 4x. What do those do? Cancel, but I also have that positive 3x, so that's going to come down. And then I have that negative 16, which also needs to come down. Does it look like I'm going to need to factor here? Do I have an x squared? Yes, I'm probably going to have to factor, which means I need to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to start by adding this 16 over here, and some of you might get confused at that point and say, because what do those 16s do? They cancel, which is fine. It just leaves me with x squared plus 3x equals 0. I can still factor that. It's 2 terms. What's the first thing we look for? GCF. What do they both have? An x. So let's factor out that x, sorry. And what would be left? X plus 3. Once you factor, we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Well, there are 2 things that I am multiplying, so I'm going to set each one of those equal to 0, and I'm going to solve for x. The first one, it just says x equals 0. That is already solved. The second one, I have to do the subtracting 3. So my 2 possible answers are 0 and -3. Can I use them both? Which one can I not use? The 0. We said x couldn't be 0, so I have to throw that answer away. Can I have -3? Yeah. What if I couldn't, though? What if my restrictions were 0 and -3? What would I say in that situation? I'd say no solution. So if you get one answer and it's your restriction, you can't use it. If you get 2 answers, if one of them's your restriction, just throw that one away. If they're both, just throw them away and say no solution. Is everybody okay with that? I want you to try one more.